edge equals. Our mantra is सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास, सबका प्रयास. It means together for everyone's growth, with everyone's trust and effort. India remains a committed partner in Africa's development journey. Our objective is not just to invest, but to empower.
Brothers and sisters of Africa, sons and daughters of a rising continent, open your ears and open your hearts, because what I am about to tell you will echo in history for generations to come. Tonight, we are not speaking of rumors or whispers. We are speaking of a thunderclap that has shaken the global order, a deal so monumental that it has left Washington trembling, New York stock markets gasping, and American farmers in outright panic. Burkina Faso, yes, the land they once dismissed as too poor, too weak, too insignificant, has stood tall on the world stage. Alongside the great nation of India, it has signed a staggering $60 billion grain trade pact. A pact that doesn't just move containers of wheat, rice, and millet, it moves the very axis of power. For the first time, the breadbasket of Africa has extended its hand to the breadbasket of Asia, and together they have shaken the throne of American dominance in global agriculture. Do you hear that sound? That is not just the signing of an agreement. That is the sound of chains breaking. That is the sound of farmers in Kudugu, Bobo Dioulasso, and Ouagadougou finally realizing that their sweat and toil are not meant to feed empires, but to feed their people, to feed their allies, and to feed a new vision of freedom. It is the sound of India declaring to the world that the future of food will no longer be dictated by one empire's whims, subsidies, and sanctions. And what of America? Their farmers wake up today in shock. For decades, they controlled grain markets with the arrogance of emperors. They drowned the world in subsidized exports, they dictated prices, they used food as a weapon. But today, they are no longer the only player in the field. Today, their monopoly has been shattered by a partnership born of resilience, born of dignity, born of nations that refuse to remain on their knees. Mark this day, because this is not just economics, it is liberation. This pact is a declaration of independence written not on paper, but in the soil of Africa and India. It is the whisper of Pan-African unity becoming a roar that cannot be silenced. It is proof that a farmer in Wahiguya and a farmer in Punjab are brothers in struggle, brothers in survival, and now brothers in triumph. Let the world take note. The age of begging bowls is over. The age of dictated trade is finished. A new dawn has broken, and in its light stands a proud Africa, unafraid to strike deals on its own terms, unafraid to chart its own path, unafraid to say to the West, your time of dominance is ending. So stay with me, because what you are about to hear tonight is not just a story of grains, it is the story of power, panic, and the unstoppable rise of a continent. My brothers, my sisters, sons and daughters of Africa, and all those listening from across the globe who still believe in justice, sovereignty, and the dignity of self-reliance, let us come together today to examine a moment so monumental, so defining, that it will be remembered in history as the day Africa reclaimed its role in the global food chain. This is not a story about grain alone. This is not merely a transaction between two countries separated by oceans. This is about power. This is about dignity. This is about a continent standing tall and declaring to the world, Africa will no longer be a beggar in the house of abundance. Burkina Faso, a nation so often underestimated, has risen once again to the forefront of a continental struggle. Joined now by one of the world's largest and fastest-growing economies, India, it has signed a historic $60 billion grain trade pact that will change forever how Africa feeds itself, how Africa trades with others, and how the balance of global power is perceived. For too long, the narrative has been that Africa is a recipient of charity, a warehouse for aid shipments stamped with foreign flags, as if our soil were incapable of producing the bounty of life. For too long, U.S. corporations and farmers have treated our markets as dumping grounds for their excess produce, subsidized, manipulated, and disguised as generosity. But today, that chapter has been burned. Today, we write a new one. Let us pause and reflect on the symbolism of this moment. Grain, the very seed of civilization, the foundation of our sustenance, has now become the weapon of Africa's emancipation. Burkina Faso, by aligning with India, has forged a partnership not based on exploitation, but on mutual respect, growth, and the acknowledgement that Africa has something valuable to bring to the table. This is not aid. This is not charity. This is trade, pure and dignified, written in the ink of equality, powered by the will of nations that have long suffered under the arrogance of the West. And what has been the reaction? From across the Atlantic: panic, fear, sleepless nights in the farms of Iowa, in the corporations of Illinois, in the offices of Washington, because they know what this means. For decades, U.S. farmers, backed by billions in government subsidies, have dumped their wheat and corn into African markets, crushing our farmers. suffocating our industries and creating a cycle of dependency that left our people hungry even in times of plenty. Now, with a single stroke of a pen, that chain is broken. Now, with a single pact worth $60 billion, Burkina Faso has announced to every farmer from California to Kansas, the days of exploiting Africa's food markets are numbered. This pact is not just about selling grain to India. It is about creating a web of resilience that binds Africa and Asia together in a new economic order. India, a nation of 1.4 billion people, needs reliable, quality food supplies to feed its growing population. Burkina Faso, rich in fertile soil and blessed with hardworking farmers, has the capacity to provide. And in return, India provides not only financial power but also technology, infrastructure investment, and political solidarity on the global stage. Together, they form a partnership that neither the United States nor Europe can ignore. Together, they represent the birth of a new agricultural axis, one that bypasses the Western monopolies and rewrites the rules of trade. But let us not underestimate the magnitude of this move. The United States has built an empire not only on oil and weapons but on food. Control the food, and you control the people, that has been their doctrine for decades. They believed that if Africa depended on U.S. wheat, then Africa would remain politically submissive. They believed that if every African table was filled with bread baked from American grain, then our leaders would never dare to say no, but Burkina Faso has said no, Niger has said no, Mali has said no, and now India has said yes to Africa. The walls of dependency are crumbling brick by brick, sack by sack, shipment by shipment. Listen to the voices coming from America's heartland. Already, farmers are panicking, watching markets they once dominated slip away into the hands of Africa and Asia. Their politicians cry foul, their corporations scramble to recalculate profits, and their media spreads fear of losing influence. But I ask you, how can you lose what was never yours to begin with? Africa's soil belongs to Africa. Africa's grain belongs to Africa, and the decision to trade it on equal terms belongs to African leaders who are finally putting their people before foreign masters. This moment is bigger than Burkina Faso alone. This is the torch that will light the path for an entire continent. Today it is grain with India. Tomorrow it may be cashews with Brazil, cotton with China, livestock with the Middle East. Step by step, deal by deal, Africa is learning to use its resources not as bargaining chips in someone else's game but as pillars of its own sovereignty. And make no mistake, every deal we sign is another nail in the coffin of Western domination. But let us not be naive. The United States will not sit quietly. They will send their envoys, their economists, their media campaigns. They will speak of concern, of market stability, of mutual benefits, all code words for trying to force Africa back into submission. They will attempt to divide us, to bribe us, to threaten us. But the choice before us is simple. Do we bow to those who once colonized us, who drained our lands and enslaved our people, or do we stand with those who treat us as equals, who see Africa not as a burden but as a partner? The decision has already been made. The Sahel has chosen. Burkina Faso has chosen. And India has answered that call. Together, they have placed $60 billion on the table as proof that the world no longer revolves around the West. The world revolves around the courage of those who dare to build it anew. This is the opening of a new era, and it is only the beginning. When history is written about this century, scholars will not speak of the decline of American wheat markets as a minor economic event. They will speak of it as the moment when Africa turned its back on dependency and claimed its rightful place among the architects of global trade. They will speak of Burkina Faso not as a small landlocked nation in West Africa, but as the vanguard of a movement, the tip of the spear that pierced through decades of economic manipulation. Let us peel back the curtain and see what lies beneath this panic in America. For decades, U.S. farmers have lived in a manufactured comfort zone, protected by subsidies, supported by lobbyists, and backed by Washington's political machinery. They have been shielded from real competition. Their surplus grain has been offloaded into African markets, often at prices so low our farmers could not compete. That practice was not charity. It was economic warfare disguised as aid. It hollowed out our food systems, forced African nations to depend on imports, and gave the U.S. leverage to dictate policies from agriculture to governance. But today, that strategy is unraveling. In the heartland of America, whispers have turned into cries. Farmers who once looked at Africa as their guaranteed customer base are waking up to the news that $60 billion worth of trade has shifted hands away from them toward Africa and Asia. This is not just a loss of profit. It is a loss of control. For every ton of grain that now flows from Burkina Faso's silos to Indian ports, there is a farmer in Kansas or Iowa who sees his political influence weaken. And for every contract signed in Ouagadougou rather than Washington, there is a lobbyist in Washington who loses his grip on power. But the brilliance of this pact lies not only in its economic weight but in its symbolism. Think about it, Africa and Asia, once colonized, once exploited, now rising together, trading not as subjects, but as equals. India brings to the table a population of more than 1 billion, a hunger for food security, and the financial muscle to secure it. Burkina Faso brings fertile soil, resilient farmers, and a determination to reclaim dignity. Together, they have shaken the foundations of the U.S.-dominated food empire. Together, they have proven that the future is not dictated in Washington or Brussels, it is written in Ouagadougou, in New Delhi, in the hearts of those who refuse to bow. This partnership is not a fleeting arrangement. The pact with India includes not only the purchase of grain but also investments in storage infrastructure, modern irrigation systems, and transport networks that will transform Burkina Faso's agricultural sector. Imagine roads built not to extract resources for colonial masters but to deliver African harvests to African ports. Imagine silos standing tall not as symbols of foreign aid but as monuments to African resilience. This is the infrastructure of sovereignty, the architecture of independence. And let us be clear, this is not just about Burkina Faso. This pact opens the door for Niger, Mali, Ghana, Ethiopia, and beyond. It sends a signal to African farmers everywhere. Your labor is valuable, your soil is powerful, your harvest is no longer the property of foreign corporations. It sends a signal to foreign investors. If you want to do business with Africa, you must come as equals, not as exploiters. Already, the ripple effects are visible. In Bamako, leaders are exploring new agreements with India for cotton and rice. In Niamey, officials are discussing the possibility of expanding millet exports to Asia. Across the continent, a fire has been lit, a hunger for trade based not on dependency but on dignity. And make no mistake, the United States sees this fire and trembles. They know that if Africa and Asia unite economically, their grip will weaken. Not just in food markets but in politics, in diplomacy, in global influence. Consider the irony. For years, U.S. officials lectured Africa about free markets and fair trade. Yet, when Africa actually engages in free trade that threatens their monopoly, they call it destabilizing. They call it dangerous. They call it unfair. But what is unfair is a century of exploitation. What is unfair is flooding our markets with subsidized crops while our farmers starve. What is unfair is expecting Africa to remain a dumping ground while they hoard the profits. Brothers and sisters, fairness has finally come to the table, and it was brought not by handouts, not by speeches, but by courage. The courage of Burkina Faso's leaders to defy the West. The courage of African farmers to believe in their soil. The courage of India to stand shoulder to shoulder with Africa against the tide of Western dominance. Do you see the shift? For once, Africa is not waiting for handshakes in Paris or signatures in Washington. Africa is dictating terms. Africa is writing contracts that put its people first. And in this, we are not alone. Asia understands our struggle. Latin America understands our struggle. Even ordinary citizens within the West understand, for they too are tired of governments that prioritize empire over humanity. And yet, let us prepare for what is to come. The United States will not surrender quietly. They will deploy economic pressure, perhaps sanctions. They will unleash media propaganda, painting Africa as reckless, painting India as opportunistic. They will attempt to sow divisions within our governments, to bribe our officials, to lure us back into chains of dependency. But Africa has changed. We are no longer that continent of fragmented voices and pliable leaders. We are the Africa of the Sahel Alliance. We are the Africa of sovereignty, dignity, and solidarity. When Burkina Faso signed this pact, it did not sign for itself alone, it signed for every African nation that dares to dream of independence. It signed for the farmer in Niger who wakes before dawn to till the land. It signed for the mother in Mali who wants her children to eat bread baked from African grain. It signed for the youth in Ghana who demand jobs, not speeches. And above all, it signed for the future generations who will inherit a continent no longer defined by hunger but by plenty. Let us remember that grain is not just food. It is power. And for the first time in modern history, that power is shifting from the West to Africa. The United States is panicking not because of lost sales alone, but because they see their influence slipping through their fingers. Influence built on controlling our tables, on deciding what our children eat, on making our survival dependent on their goodwill. That influence is dying, and it is dying fast. This is the hour of Africa's awakening. This is the dawn of a new global balance. And as the sun rises over the fields of Burkina Faso, it rises also over the dreams of an entire continent ready to stand tall. Let us now lift our gaze higher and look into the horizon that stretches beyond today's headlines. This $60 billion pact is not just about trade. It is about rewriting the destiny of nations. It is about declaring to the world that Africa will no longer kneel to the dictates of foreign monopolies. It is about showing that when a farmer in Burkina Faso plants his seeds, he is not just feeding his village, he is shaping the future of global power. The United States trembles because they see a domino effect. Today it is grain, tomorrow it will be oil, rare earth, minerals, technology, and culture. They see that Africa is no longer a passive market but an active producer, a powerful negotiator, a builder of alliances beyond their reach. They understand that if India and Africa can collaborate on food security, then China, Brazil, and others will follow, forming a network of partnerships that leaves America isolated, reduced to one voice among many instead of the dominant overlord. In their panic, U.S. media outlets have begun to churn stories about instability. They will tell the world that Africa cannot be trusted to manage such a colossal deal. They will paint Burkina Faso's government as reckless, corrupt, incapable of delivering on promises. But let us ask, who created the narrative of African incapacity? In the first place, was it not the same West that enslaved our people, extracted our wealth, and then claimed we were unfit to govern ourselves? Was it not the same corporations that destroyed our soil with imposed farming practices, then accused us of failing to modernize? That narrative is collapsing, and it collapses most loudly when African grain ships sail eastward with pride and profit. What they do not realize is that this pact represents a new spirit. It is not only government to government but people to people. Indian scientists are already preparing to work alongside. Agronomists, African farmers are preparing to train in India's agricultural institutes. Students from both nations will exchange knowledge, learning how to make agriculture not just an industry but a science of dignity. This is not the charity model of the West. This is not aid. This is cooperation. This is equality. This is what true partnership looks like. Now, let us imagine the ripple effects. With this pact, Burkina Faso's GDP will grow. With this pact, jobs will multiply from the man who harvests the grain to the woman who runs transport businesses, to the youth who designs software for managing supply chains. With this pact, rural farmers will finally see fair prices for their labor. With this pact, African children will grow up believing not that their future lies in migration to foreign shores but in cultivating the richness of their own soil. But the most powerful effect of this pact is psychological. For centuries, Africa was taught to believe it could not compete with the West. Today, Africa is proving that. Not only can it compete, it can win. The U.S. farmer panics not because of mere economics but because of the shattering of a myth. The myth that Africa is forever dependent. That myth has been buried under fields of millet and wheat harvested by African hands. Let me speak directly to the American farmer watching this unfold. Your anger is not with Africa. Your anger should be with the system that lied to you, that made you believe your prosperity must come at the expense of others. Your anger should be with the government that subsidized your crops while preaching free trade abroad. Your anger should be with corporations that sold you the illusion of eternal dominance. Africa did not betray you, your empire betrayed you. And to Africa, let me speak with clarity. This is just the beginning. If one small nation like Burkina Faso can sign a $60 billion pact and shake the entire foundation of American agriculture, imagine what 54 nations united can do. Imagine an Africa that sets the price of its own cocoa, coffee, gold, and uranium. Imagine an Africa that trades directly with Asia and Latin America, bypassing Western middlemen. Imagine an Africa where every farmer, miner, engineer, and artist works not for foreign exploitation but for African prosperity. This is the Pan-African dream, and it is no longer just a dream. It is becoming reality before our very eyes. But let us not deceive ourselves. The road ahead will not be without struggle. America will not simply retreat. They will attempt to disrupt this pact through financial manipulation, diplomatic pressure, even covert destabilization. They may attempt to bribe leaders, to sow division between African states, to ignite conflicts where peace has taken root. We must be vigilant. We must protect our sovereignty not only in words but in institutions. We must invest in our militaries, in our media, in our schools. Because sovereignty is not a speech, it is a way of life, defended at every level. And to India, let us say, this pact is historic, but let it be the seed of something greater. Let it be the foundation of an Africa-Asia food corridor that reshapes global trade. Let it be the blueprint for a South-South alliance that redefines development. Let it be proof that when two civilizations long oppressed by colonialism join hands, the world can never again be ruled by one empire's shadow. Brothers and sisters, today's celebration is not only about Burkina Faso. It is about every African nation daring to reclaim its destiny. It is about Mali, Niger, Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia. It is about the islands of the Indian Ocean and the coasts of West Africa. It is about every child who deserves to grow up in a continent that is rich not only in resources but in dignity. So let us close with this. The age of begging is over. The age of dependence is dead. The age of sovereignty has arrived. America's farmers may panic, Washington's politicians may scheme, but nothing can stop the march of history. And history is marching to the rhythm of African drums, carrying the grains of our soil across oceans, feeding the world not as slaves but as equals. Stand tall, Burkina Faso. Stand tall, Africa. The world has seen your courage, and nothing will ever be the same again.